You know, I was here 42 years.
You were here how many years?
42.
That's not possible, Cookie.
I was.
So you came here when you were a 3-year-old baby?
Well, you know, I actually graduated. I turned 16 and I graduated 2 months later.
From high school?
Mm,
You're a prodigy, Cookie.
well, you know.
So who named you that name?
A little Caucasian girl. I
want you to repeat this one. She's
Okay.
It's recording.
Oh, sorry.
It is. Oh. Well, a little Caucasian. We had to move away from the Bay Area. And when the war started, are we already starting on this thing now?
Yes.
Well, when December 7th terrible bombing of Pearl Harbor happened, we went to school and we were terribly embarrassed because we didn't know how we would be accepted in school. But I must tell you that when was it? It was December 7th. We had just come home from church, from Sunday school, and we didn't know we never heard of Pearl Harbor. And then when we got home, my parents were dressed to go out somewhere. And they said, oh, a terrible thing happened. And they said a friend of ours had passed away in San Francisco and they had to go to visit them. And so we were having a quick lunch, and then that's when we heard about Pearl Harbor. Oh, and that's when we heard about Pearl Harbor. And we said, where's Pearl Harbor? Nobody seemed to know it. And we were out in the streets and everybody was talking, I think we're in a war. And we hadn't decided what had happened, but my parents went to the neighbors and said, we have to leave to visit some people in San Francisco. Can you look after our children for us? I was at that time 12 years old. My sister was 15 and my brother was 9. And so they said, we will be home. It was not quite noontime yet, and they said, we will be home by 3:30 or 4. And so we left. So my parents left, and then we had lunch, and then we were playing, and all of us, it was 3:30, 4:30, and my parents didn't get home. We thought, this is strange. And so it wasn't until 8 o'clock that they got home, and they told us that when they were on the way to San Francisco, they were stopped at the bridge, and they were frisked, and they were questioned, and they were delayed for about an hour. Then they went across the bridge, and when they got on the other side of the bridge, again, they were stopped and questioned, and also when they visited the friends, they just had a short visit. And
who stopped them?
The police. The
Just
police.
randomly?
Oh yes, pulled them off the bridge. And so what happened was on the way back, the same thing happened. So they didn't get home till about 8 o'clock, and we were frantic because we knew by then that Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor. And we thought, oh, this is terrible. And so we thought my parents were jailed or something. And they got home, and we were relieved. And the next day we went to school, and I was in grammar school. And the teacher called assembly at 9 o'clock and said that we were at war now, and we will only be in school a half a day. But they said, our principal said, we have very many Japanese American children, but they are American citizens. They are not to blame. So please know that we're all the same. We all come from different places, and that we are not to blame, the Japanese Americans. And today we will just have half a day of school. Well, everybody was all happy about that more than anything else, and we went home. Monday we came back to school, and then things seemed a little different. Just seemed a little different. But then in a few days we found that the FBI was all over Alameda. And we just only
Is
knew
that
about
where your
Alameda.
school was, in Alameda?
In Alameda. I was born in Alameda, April 1st, 1929. That's another thing. I was born April 1st, April Fool's Day, and I always had to live that down. But then some people called us and they said, Mr. Takano, my name was T-A-K-A-N-O, Takano, it's now Takeshita, but they said, you know, the FBI is looking for all the active Japanese people, citizens. And my father was very active in the church, in the Japanese Association, the Japanese school. And we were so worried, and before we knew it, many people, the fathers were being taken away by the FBI. And that really bothered us because we were so afraid. And I told my father, oh, we'll be so embarrassed if you're taken by the FBI. They'll think you're a spy. And he said, oh, no, 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 we're not spies. He said, they're just going to take people who they might think are organizers. And from that day on, we were very afraid of what was going to happen. Well, things happened very quickly. One night, we got this phone call, and we had this ruling. We were not to be out of the house after 8 o'clock. Also, we could not travel more than 5 miles. Well, my brother-in-law, who, of course, he's deceased now, but I didn't know him then, but he was going to Berkeley. He was coming here to Berkeley, and he lived in Oakland. And he had to quit school because they weren't allowed to travel more than 5 miles. So some of his Caucasian friends told him, never mind. They got a car, and they put him in the back seat, and covered him, and they drove him to Cal. And then when people found out, they thought, well, this is dangerous to do. We're breaking the law. So then he stopped coming to school. But in the meanwhile, we were hearing all kinds of rumors that we were going to be shipped back to Japan and all this stuff. But at that time, it wasn't only Alameda, all over down Los Angeles and all over where there were Japanese communities. The FBI had come and taken anybody who was a leader. And so by February 22nd, all of a sudden we had to get out. I can't remember when that ruling came, and they said we had to be out. There were 3 cities, Alameda was one, and San Pedro and Terminal Island. San Pedro and Terminal Island, there was a big Japanese community, and most of the men were fishermen working for Starkist. They were all fishermen. Over here, the Bay Area, they said it was because of the Naval Air Station, but there really wasn't a Naval Air Station there. It was just being built up. But so the FBI was all over here, and someone called and said, Mr. Takano, your name was on, that was my father's name, your name is on the list. And you should be ready. They may come after you. And my father said, well, I've done nothing wrong. They said, no, but they're just picking up the people who have been active in the community. And we were very frightened about this. And then came the ruling that we had to be out of Alameda by February 22nd. So my father, so most of the Japanese people left. We had nowhere to go, but as long as you went into Oakland, Berkeley, anywhere, as long as you got out of Alameda, you were presumed to be all right. But my father felt he had a responsibility to help close up the church and do different things to get everybody out of Alameda. But the older children who were citizens of, so they helped to close up the church, and my father was there. And my mother said tomorrow, which was going to be the 22nd, was the last day, and we had to be out by then. My mother sent my sister and me, she said, we're going to the country. A family invited us to move to a town called Cortez. Even right now, people have never heard of that place, but it was way out in Turlock, and they were farmers. And this gentleman and family said, well, as long as you have to move out of Alameda, why don't you come here? And invited my father to bring the whole family and stay with them. And they said, well, it'll probably be very temporary. When everything settles down, you can go back to Alameda. But we had to get out quickly. My sister and my mother said, my mother was bedridden, she was not well, and she said, I want you to go up the street to Park Street, that was the shopping area in Alameda, and go to Long's and pick up metal plates, metal cups, and toothbrush. And she said, we're going to a very rural area, so we just want to have those things. And so my sister and I were going up the street, and we went about 3 or 4 blocks, and we looked down the street. That's where our church was. Then we saw this family, and we saw 2 black cars, and we knew it was the FBI. And then we saw the family coming out of the house, and they were crying, and the father was being taken away. So my sister and I were so frantic, we ran home. We didn't go to the lawns at all. We ran home, and we told my mother, Mr. Nakata, who lived next door to the church, was taken. The word was taken. Everything was he taken? Was he taken? And we said, Mr. Nakata was taken. And so we didn't even go to lawns. We ran home and told my mother. So my mother tried to call the church, and that home was right next to the church. And Mr. Nakata lived right next door, and we saw him being taken away by the FBI. And my mother tried to call the church to get my father, please get home. It's very dangerous. But all the phones were disconnected. So my father got home that evening and he said, well, we're getting everything, locked everything away, and the Navy was going to take over the Buddhist church. And across the street was the Japanese Methodist church, and so they were busy cleaning up their place,
What was your church name?
the Alameda Buddhist Temple. And so my father came home, and then that's when my mother said the man next door had been taken by the FBI. So my father got on the phone because there was a young man that lived in what is now Fremont, and there were some Japanese farmers that way, and my father had been very friendly with them, and the gentleman said, I will send my son to pick you up when you move away to this place called Cortez, and he will bring his truck, so put on what you can. So, but my father didn't want to say the FBI's around, so he said, can you come a little earlier? So that young fellow, he must have been 22 or so, he came at 5 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning, which was the 22nd, the last day that we were to be there. And so we piled everything on, and my father, at the time, my father had 2 cars, and he left his Chevy there, we left our furniture, we left everything there, and everything just clothes, whatever we could carry, put on the truck. And then my father drove my mother, my sister, and me in his car, and my brother got on the truck with this young man. And we left at 5 o'clock in the morning, and right now you could get to this place in less than an hour and a half, or less than an hour. It took us from 5 in the morning till 5:30, and we finally got to this farm, and they greeted us, and we said, oh, we're so relieved. The FBI was all over Alameda, and they were taking the people away. And so they said, they just left. A half hour ago, the FBI was here, and they took some of our men, too. It was a very frightening period. And then I started to go to, but my father wanted us to continue school, so we went to the school, and they couldn't pronounce my name. It was Ikuko, and there was Ikuko, whatever. The little girl said to me, may we call you Cookie? And I said, oh yes, fine. And so from that time, from this little country school, this little girl said, may we call you Cookie? And it just stuck, just Cookie. And while we were there, then we got orders again that we were not to go back to where we had left, and we were all being moved to camps. And we didn't know what they meant by camps, but they put us in, actually they were all racetracks. We went into Merced, we say Merced Assembly Center, but it was a racetrack. There was Tanforan. People, Oakland, Berkeley, all those people went into Tanforan racetrack. And the people in Los Angeles that went to Santa Anita racetrack, and we didn't know why we were going there, but it was a temporary place. They had many all across California. And then we were there only a few months, and they were horse stables. And the people, the Bay Area here, people from San Francisco will tell you that when it rained, it smelled so badly because they were where the horses were kept in the stables. And they said that when it rained, it smelled so terribly that it was unbearable to be in. And but we were there, we couldn't leave. But when we went to Merced Assembly Center, but I did go to the little grammar school in Cortez, and there was not a large, but there were many Japanese people there. There were farmers, and so we all ended up in Merced Assembly Center. And one day, I was 12 years old. We were kind of hungry, and we were enclosed with barbed wire fences at that time. And grapes were growing in the vineyards right outside this horse track. And so my 2 friends and I were reaching through the fence there, and we were trying to pick the grapes that were growing, and then all of a sudden we heard these shots, and a Jeep came up, and there were 2 soldiers on there, and they were telling us that they were going to put us in jail. We were stealing, and we were so frightened that they took our names, and we ran back, and I ran back to the barracks that we were in. We were put in barracks, and I slept under the bed. I was so scared that we were going to jail. But then when the mess bell rang, we all had to go. Everything was community style. The bell rang, and whatever block they had A, B, C, D, and we were in D block, you would line up and eat. And I was so afraid to go that they might be looking for me, but I was so hungry, I lined up and we went, and my friends, we all went in to eat. And the next morning, when I got up, there was a sign on the door, and to report to the main gate. And I thought, oh, they're gonna put me in jail. And so I said, take this notice and go to the main gate. And I didn't say anything to my parents, and I took it, I went to the main gate, and then the MP let me through into this big auditorium. And all of a sudden, I saw my school teacher there from this country school, and she said, I brought you your diploma. And I said, and she said, you know, you graduated 8th grade. And so I was so happy that it was that. And she says, is there anything you want? And I said, no, I'm so happy that, is this all? She said, oh yes, and I want to tell you did very well. And you're graduating with the class. And so I got my diploma, and I was so happy about that. And I thought I would never do anything like that again. But shortly thereafter, we got to notice that we were being moved out of Merced Assembly Center. And we didn't know where we were going. And later we got word that we were being put on trains and we would be going to Colorado. We said, well, we have all our things. What do we do? And they said, no, you're going to go to Colorado. So we were put on these trains. And every time, you know, it took us 3 days and 3 nights to get to Colorado because we would have to stop to let other trains through, military trains or any train. We would have to pull the shades down, and we couldn't look out. And then when all the other trains passed, then we would pull up our shades. And then they would let us off in the desert to go to the bathroom because the bathrooms weren't working in the trains. And all of us tripped by cars. We would get out into the desert. And we would go to the bathroom, and my mother would tell us, don't turn your back to the trains because all the MPs were there. They had their rifles on us. So they said, just do what you have to do, and we hide behind the cactus bush or whatever. And then we'd get back on the train. And because every time a train would go by, we'd have to pull down the shades and pull over to the side. It took us 3 days and 3 nights to get to Colorado. Then when we got to Colorado, they put us on buses. And then we went into the desert. And then when we got off, and before we got off, some official got on. He said, we want to tell you you're in the desert now. And when you get up in the mornings, you will be assigned rooms. And when you get up in the morning, be sure to shake your shoes out because we have scorpions and centipedes in the desert. And they're all over the place. So that really frightened us. And we didn't even know what a scorpion or a centipede was. And so we thought, oh dear, but then we were on the bus, we were taken inland into the desert, and then we were assigned these rooms, and room not even this big, 5 people, 5 or 6 people, and if there were, then there was rooms that were half this for 2 people. And because they only had a pot-belly stove and no running water, nothing, they had cots. And we made our own beds, they had cots. And like I said, pot-belly stove. And then where everything was community style. We had several blocks. We were in 9E, they had 6E, 7E, 8E, 9E, went up to, you know. And our camp was one of the smallest. It was called, first they called it Granada, then they changed it to Amachi. Why, I don't know, but somebody said because the town way far away was called Granada, and they didn't want to have the same name as we did. And they named us Amachi, and I really don't know why they changed it. But everything was community style. We had to line up to eat. They'd ring the bell, and we would line up to eat. And the bathrooms were all community style. And it was really, I would say, very, I can't think of the word, but well, there was no privacy. In fact, in the bathrooms, and this was to be the permanent camp. The one in Merced was even worse. But when we got to the desert, they would have 5 toilets, 5 this side, facing each other, no partitions. And so we asked, can you at least put partition in between? And so, and then at one time they had a shower where one tall person would pull the chain, and we were all under this thing, no privacy at all. But But you know, the dignity of the Japanese, it just, I think about it now, they were so polite. And when they would have to go to sit on, you know, to go to the bathroom, and they would bow to everybody, and everybody wanted the very last one, but you didn't want to be the first one. We used to laugh about that they were so courteous. They would bow, and then after they sat down, they would bow across of each other, and that struck me as very hilarious at first. In later years, I thought that how they were so polite through the whole thing. And we lined up when the bell rang to eat. If you didn't eat at that time, you didn't eat because you were assigned that particular mess hall in that block. But what happened was we had 9E, and next to us there was a road, and there was called 10E, Block 10E. And the Block 10E said they kept running out of food. Every block had approximately 200 people. But 10E said, at the end, when the cooks and the workers, the people, the Japanese had to do the cooking, and they said we wouldn't have food for us. They couldn't understand why, because every block had so much food. And so they investigated. It turned out that the people in my block, 90, there were a lot of young boys, they would run when the bell rang first, and they would line up and eat. And then they'd run across the street and get in the tail end of that line, because you know, no one knew anyone. We were all strangers, and we came from different towns, and they found out that more people were eating there. They couldn't understand it, but it was because the young boys in our block would get in line first and then run across the street and get in the tail end of that. And that was solved. Then our parents said, you know, in spite of the way we're living, we must still have some dignity and some authority over our children. And they said, so they decided to assign these tables. All of us would try to sit next to our friends. And so we weren't being well-mannered at all. So our parents got together and they put families together. They had a table of 10 people, and they would put a family of 5 and 5 together. So we didn't get to, you know, sit with our friends, and if there was a couple or a bachelor or whatever, they would fill the table with 10 people. And so our parents would have a little, what would you say, about our manners. And so our block was one of the first ones to do that. They felt that in spite of how we were living, they felt that we still should have respect for others and manners and whatever. So our block was one of the first to do that. And then they started the schools, and our parents had said, regardless of the food, or we can't change that, regardless of the living quarters, the one thing we do want to have is education to continue. And so they did have a school. We had it in the barracks first, and in later years they did build a school. And we had Caucasian teachers that came from other parts of the country. And we had one teacher, they were all very nice. And we had one teacher, although she would say to us, she would write on the board and she said, I'm not going to turn my back on you Japs, because she said, you stab us on the back all the time. And I went home and I told my mother, this teacher is terrible, and they should fire her. And I was only 12, and my mother said, do you know, she was nice enough to come into a place like this, 110 degrees in the summer, snow up to the knees, and we never lived in that kind of condition, and she's kind enough, she and her husband, to come in and teach you. So you should be, and then I thought to myself in later years, you know, my parents and most of the Japanese people saw this terrible degradation going, but it's always a positive outlook, always. When you get out, then you could go on to school. It was always this kind of a thing. And you know, later years, this teacher became one of our favorites. And she and her husband were so kind to us later, and I think they thought probably we were hoodlums or something too. But all of our teachers were so kind. We had many Japanese students, young girls and boys, who were going to UCLA or USC, and we had part of LA in our camp, and the people of Merced County, and they mixed us up all. And so, and they were about to graduate, and they were, you know, really competent enough to be teachers, but they became assistant teachers. And they were very, very bright, but they became the assistant teachers. And our parents, regardless, made us study all the time. They said, one of these days you will be out and you should be prepared to be ready for the new world, they would tell us. And I was in that camp from age 12 to 16. But one day, but they would come and luckily my father was not taken by the FBI. We escaped that morning, but in camp everybody had to work, and they picked my father, and some of them were carpenters by trade, some were farmers, and so they had the people work out in the farms and growing our own vegetables, and so the people who were farmers helped by work. They had all this land in the desert, so they started to, the Japanese farmers started to grow the vegetables for the camps. And my father had come to America as a businessman because his sister owned all the movie theaters in Fukuoka, Japan. And he would come here to buy film, and when he came here, he just loved America. He thought, this is so nice, this country is so nice, so he shipped the film, and he told his sister, I'm staying here a while. And he stayed for a while and until the money was about to run out. And he thought, oh, I have to get back. And then somebody said, are you going to stay here? He said, well, I'd like to, but I have to get back because I've used all my money. He said, well, do you want to work for me for a while? So my father said, all right. And this was in Alameda. And this man had a hothouse, and he had these little bedding plants. And he said, my father said, what is that? They said, the bedding plants for the gardeners. And he said the Japanese men from Japan either became farmers or gardeners because they couldn't speak English. And so they all became gardeners. And so my father said, oh, and then after a while this man said, you know, you're a people person. You shouldn't be in a place like this all day. Why don't you learn gardening? And one man happened to come by, a Japanese man who was a gardener. He said, I'll teach you how to do gardening. So my father, until he died, in fact, he never told his family that he became a gardener. He never went back to Japan. But then he stayed and he loved America. And he became a gardener and he became very successful. Very successful. But during the Depression, 38, 39, we were just coming out of the Depression, my father had 2 cars and we didn't realize it, but we were having things nicer than other people. And we went to regular grammar school when we were children, and then we went to Japanese school. Every Japanese family sent their children to Japanese school. They said, you have a Japanese face, you can't hide it, so you should learn Japanese. So we went to Japanese school when we were little children, until the war came, and then we were sent to camp. But my father said, during the day you go to grammar school, you're learning English, you speak English all day long. When you come home, we will teach you Japanese. If we speak to you in English, we will be teaching you improper English. We will teach you perfect Japanese, so you are not to speak English at home. We will teach you Japanese. So consequently, in Japanese school, my brother, my sister, and I were always the top student but we were jealous of the other children because their parents would speak in broken English to them. And so both the English and the Japanese, my father didn't want to see this, that we would speak poor English because our parents would not know proper English. So we had to speak Japanese at home, but during the day it was all English. And so my father had us taking piano lessons, but then when the war came along, we lost everything and we had to leave. And I remember my father was renting this house, and this Portuguese man, very kind man, he would come bring a bottle of wine to my father. He made his own wine, and he said, you are never late on your rent. He said, Mr. Takano, I will sell you this house. And he had broken English. He was an immigrant from Portugal, so both their broken English, they're talking. My father said, oh no, go to jail. He said, why would you go to jail? And this man, and I remember hearing this, and this man said, you are never late. You have paid for this house 10 times over. I will sell it to you. And my father said, no. He said, go to jail. I did not know too much later that California, if you were not a citizen, you were not allowed to buy a home. And the United States would not give citizenship to the Chinese and the Japanese. They were the only immigrants that were not allowed citizenship. And so if you didn't have citizenship, California said you cannot buy property. So we were little children, but there were farmers and other people who had come to America much before my father did. They eventually had children who were 21. Then they would buy a home in their name. But in the farms, there were a lot of Japanese people, their children. They put the farms in their children's name who were like 10 and 12, 15, and this was illegal. But my father didn't want to do that. He said no. And the Portuguese man did not know that law. And my father said, you go to jail, I go to jail, my father said. And he said, why would you go to jail? And my father tried to explain, no, we cannot buy property. My daughter's only 15. My sister was the oldest then. And so my father paid rent all this time. Then when the war started, we went to camp. Then when we came back, well, I must tell you, in camp, my sister turned 18, and she was allowed to go out because she wanted to go to school. So if the parents gave permission and the authorities gave permission, you can go out as long as there's a place you can go. She went to Cleveland, Ohio, and we had the WRA, War Relocation Authority, that had gone to Chicago and to help relocate some of us. So my sister went to Cleveland, and they placed her in a Caucasian home. And so she was going to go to school, but she got a job to get money to go to school in Cleveland. She wanted to go to college. And I was in camp, and I just turned 16 in April, and 2 teachers came to talk to my mother. They had taken my father out of camp. They took most of the men out of camp to work outside in Colorado, in the farms, whatever. We didn't see them, they just took them away. And they told my mother, Cookie is only 16, but she can graduate because she's bright enough, and she has only 2 months. But we are going to close the school. If you can afford, we will make it possible for her to go out of this camp to Cleveland. We understand you have a daughter in Cleveland. But if you are willing to, and you can afford to get her to Cleveland, then she can graduate at age 16. Now, I just turned 16 in April, and this was about May. They came to talk to my mother. So my mother wrote to my father and said, Ikuko has a chance to graduate at 16. And so, but we will need money. They will transport her out of camp. They were getting rid of me, so they would transport her out. But then, if I have a place to stay, so I wrote to my sister, and the family she was staying with said, have your sister come out here, that's all right. And so, my father said he would send some money, because they were getting a little better pay in camp. The doctors got, professional doctors, Japanese doctors, got $19 a month in camp. And all the rest of the people got $16. They worked 6 days a week. They were either policemen or carpenter or whatever. Everybody had to work. And they asked my father to be in the internal security. And my father didn't want to be in the internal security. That was like policing people. And because the FBI, when the Japanese people were taken by the FBI, they all thought that some Japanese person or somebody might have said something that made it very dangerous, and the FBI got the goods on them, so to speak, and took them away. So my father said, I don't want to be where police enforcement kind of a thing, because if something happens, they'll think all these people were tattletaling or something on the others. And so, but they said, no, Mr. Takano, you know, you have fine character, everybody trusts you. So my father then, he wasn't a doctor, and he wasn't a carpenter or anything, so he joined the internment group. So then they took him on. They took most of the men on, and they put them to work in Colorado on the farms and did different things, because a lot of the people in Colorado had gone into the army and all. And so my father wrote back, and he said, I will send you some money and send Cookie out to Cleveland. So I went to Cleveland. Then I finished out my 2 months, but I had to come back again to camp. And it was wonderful to be out of the camps. I ate my banana for the first time in 3.5 years. That was my favorite fruit. And I just didn't want to go back, but I had to go back. So on the way back, my sister got me my ticket, and she said, you will stop in Kansas City. Go to the information desk first and find out where. You're going to have to transfer. Find out what track that you should be at for the train to Colorado. And she said, be sure to do that before anything. And then when you find out all that information, then you'll have about an hour and a half. So she said, maybe we go somewhere, get something to eat. And so she gave me 50 cents on the train. There's chicken pot pie, it's 50 cents. And she had given me some money, and she was still trying to make money to go to school. And so she put me on the train, and I had to come back to camp, and I stopped off at Kansas City. And then I got my information where I should be. In an hour and a half, this train was coming. So I saw this counter and people were eating, so I went there, and I just wanted a Coke, and that's all I could afford at the time. So I sat there, and then somebody got up and left, sat down, got waited on. Person next to me left, someone came and got waited on, and I sat there and I said, excuse me. And I was 60, I said, excuse me, all I wanted was a Coke. And I thought, I wonder why they're not waiting on me. And I sat there about half an hour. And I said, excuse me. And then someone tapped me on the shoulder. And I turned around, and there was a Japanese American soldier. He was in his uniform, and he said, they won't serve you here. I said, what? I said, all I want is a Coke. He said, well, they won't serve you here. Why don't you come with me? And I looked at him and I said, but I don't know you. And when I was a little girl, there was a big news, a famous person called Lindbergh's child was kidnapped. And that was the big thing when we were children. We never went anywhere, so we never, but I said, I knew he was Japanese, and he had a uniform. I said, but I don't know you. He said, but I know you. He said, you played with my little sister in the Merced Assembly Center. That's when we were picking the grapes, and we were 12. By now I was 16. And he said, it's all right. I'm going back to camp. It's my last furlough. I'm going overseas. And he said, come with me. And so then I got off my chair. He took me to the area. It was all military families at the station. And he said, what would you like? And I said, oh, I'm so thirsty, I'd like a Coke. And the Coke stays in my mind all the time, so I drank it down so fast. He said, would you like something else to eat? I said, no, I'd like another Coke. And so I got another Coke. And then he said, you stay with me, because when the train comes, military gets on first. And so